Hello YouTube. Today, obviously by the title, I'm going to show you how to do the big three on the Subaru Forester. Now behind me I have the 2013 Forester, but the layout in the engine is pretty much the same throughout the models, so it's going to apply to a lot of the different ones. Now obviously, you're going to need some zero gauge wire for this, absolutely zero gauge, don't go any smaller. You're going to need a hammer crimp for the terminals because you really need a strong connection, so while you're driving the wires do not come loose at all. What I did actually was I bought an amp wiring kit which came with the fuse, which you also need, and the zero gauge wire. Now it did come with 6 O-ring terminals, which you will need 8 for this setup, and you can also use a multimeter for this because you want to check what you're doing. You don't want to fry anything, especially with the alternator. So, alright, let's get into this. So obviously for this modification we're going to be working underneath the hood. Now first you want to identify your alternator, which is right in the middle, and the battery all the way on the right side. Now the alternator, you can look up a picture of what it looks like because of the way the camera's angled. I guess you really can't see it, but on the top of this model is a red top to it. Now this is the positive, and the body of the alternator is the negative charge. So absolutely keep that in mind whenever you're doing this, because you do not want to mix poles, especially the alternator to the battery. Now second, with the battery, you want to find the shortest distance to the negative, well, your chassis for the negative. Now the closest you can get it is the better. There is a nut behind the fuse box and to the right of it. Now a shorter distance would have been to the right of it, but I couldn't get back there, so I had to use behind there. So just keep that in mind. You want the shortest distance for your negative to the chassis. Now after you've identified these different parts, you want to lay out your wire. Make sure that you have enough wires so that you can route it underneath the different tubing inside the engine and keep it clear of any moving parts. Now I use zip ties to actually keep these wires in place, with also a protective plastic coating or covering to them so that they don't melt under the heat from the engine. Well, obviously I already have this done. I've tested it. I've been using this for a couple months now and it has worked. Now first thing you want to do is you want to remove the negative side of the battery to the car. The reason you want to do this is because the chassis of your car is negatively charged. So if you take off the positive red side first and it touches something in the car, it's going to short, and you do not want that. So take off the black negative side first, and then find or route the wire and cut it to length. We're going to start with the positive alternator. Positive alternator to the positive side of the battery. Now this is also what you're going to install the fuse on as well. For this case I'm using a 150 amp A&L fuse. Now 150 amps is a lot. I would recommend about 100 or less. If this thing blows, then there was something that went really wrong. So take off the nut and route the positive side to the alternator to the positive side of the battery. Now this is also where that hammer crimp is going to come in handy, and also have the plastic protectant sleeve to the terminals as well, because you do not want these wires touching anything else in the engine. You want to make sure that they're clear of any moving parts. So make sure you really crimp down the terminal side, because you do not want it coming loose, especially while you're driving. So after you have the positive installed, you can close this, make it look neat, or as neat as you possibly can, and we don't have to mess with anything more on the positive side. The rest is going to be the negative. So since you have the negative side removed, you're going to want to route the negative to one of the parts of the chassis, as I just described before, and simply just mount that to the negative side of the battery. And then you're going to want to run the wire from the negative side of the battery to some point on the alternator that you can get to. Now mine is located behind the alternator. As you can see, this is how my alternator is laid out. This is the negative bolt that I used because it's touching the chassis part, and that is just run to the negative side of my battery. So after you have those 3 wires installed, that's pretty much all you do. Reconnect the black side and start up the car. Now, really go over the red and the black before you start up your car. This could really mess everything up if you have reverse the polarities in any way, but at least you do have the positive fuse to protect yourself. Now the positive fuse is also a really big part, and I would not skip over that at all. That's how to install the big 3 on the Subaru Forester. Now obviously depending on the year it might be a little bit different, but if you have any questions or any comments, definitely feel free to mention it down below. And obviously, as every YouTuber's ever said, don't forget to rate, comment, and subscribe. And I'll see you in the next video.